Hello, everybody. Welcome to our webinar today, where we're taking a look at the new disclosure rules and posing the question, will the new rules enforce the use of technology? We're also going to look at the latest assisted review technology, which is the type of technology the courts will expect to be used. Just a bit of housekeeping before we get going. You'll see on the screens in a moment there's a poll there so you can submit sort of what type of organisation you're coming from. So you can just click on the relevant section there, and we'll close that off shortly. You can submit questions throughout by typing them into the GoToWebinar panel on the right-hand side of the screen. You're welcome to submit questions throughout the webinar, and we'll have some time at the end to answer these. And the webinar will be recorded, and after the webinar, you'll be sent a link. I'm Martin Flavel, the UK Director of Sky Discovery, and I'm here to introduce the two speakers we have today, Sahel Kaum and Samantha Kelly. Both Sahel and Samantha are on our consulting team. They offer support to legal teams by providing guidance on the review process and implementing efficient, defensible workflows which are required when dealing with large volumes of data. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Sahel.
Thank you, Martin. So as Martin mentioned, we're talking about the new disclosure rules that have been piloted on the 1st of January and how we're going to use technology with them. So the agenda for today will be to discuss very briefly the summary of the disclosure pilot and the new disclosure rules. We're going to compare the new disclosure review document against the current electronic disclosure questionnaire, or the disclosure questionnaire. And then I'll pass over to Samantha, who will go through the evolution of technology assisted review, comparing the two versions, give an overview of active learning and how it works, and then also we're going to talk about where active learning wouldn't be used, or the example of when it shouldn't be used. We'll go through a few case studies, and then we'll hopefully have a bit of time at the end to give you some opportunity for question Q&A. So with regards to the disclosure pilot, it was the actual disclosure working group was set up in 2016, and the idea was taking some experts from the judiciary, the legal profession, as well as professional associations, and the plan was to find out what the problem was with the current solution with regards to disclosure. And what they concluded almost immediately after their first meeting, and it wasn't one for dispute, is that the standard disclosure was currently producing large amounts of wholly irrelevant documents and led to a considerable waste of time and costs. Also, as a result of that, there was inadequate judicial resources that led to judges at times not being able to deal with the disclosure issues at the case management conference. Which kind of just meant the standard disclosure became the default position, so it kind of a sort of never-ending loop. What the disclosure review, what the disclosure working group has done is created this pilot scheme which will be commencing next year. Currently, it's going to be working within a couple of courts within London, Birmingham, Manchester, business and property courts. And the idea is it's going to be tested and trialled to see if the disclosure process can be made a bit more refined, a bit more up to date with the 21st century and the current with the documentation that we have now in terms of electronic data and how much we have. So the disclosure review document was prepared to replace, as I mentioned earlier, the EDQ and the disclosure report. It's a wordy document, but the actual details of what needs to be completed are kind of more an ongoing process, not a sort of all done at the beginning. It is a development that can be happening throughout the course of the disclosure exercise. And then we've got these 5 models for extended disclosure, which includes no disclosure or no order for disclosure, which is model A, through to the widest search-based disclosure, model E for extended disclosure, and then we'll move, and then the 3 levels in between. So this is replacing standard disclosure. There is still basic disclosure, which will be the standard. And the idea is for parties to disclose only what they need to. And also, the main thing here was that for the sort of models C and E, where we're talking about more extended search-based disclosure, the requirement for using TAR on a review universe that contains at least 50,000 documents.
Okay, so I'll just want to put a poll up now to get some feedback on what you think about these the parameters being set here. So is the 50,000 document threshold in use of technology, is it too high? Is it about right, or is it too low? I'll just leave that open for a couple of moments. We're still getting plenty of results in, so just leave it open a little bit longer. Okay. We will go through all of the polling results at the end of the webinar. I'm going to close this one off now.
Okay, so so the idea behind the disclosure pilot is to encourage cooperation between the parties and to get as much agreement as possible from the early stage. So even in advance of the case manual conference, the idea is to agree a draft list of issues, to look at which model would be appropriate for any given issue. So rather than it being at a matter level, so that we're going to disclose this matter entirely on standard disclosure, we can actually go, actually this particular issue is relevant and would be more useful if we reviewed it with the disclosure purposes of Model C and then maybe just Model A, because it's quite a little more wider search requirement to get that in there. And also you can discuss the disclosure of the sections. You can also discuss the sections of the disclosure review document that you're going to be completing throughout the course of the review. Now, we've discussed this, and this has been discussed many times, and again, it's more just a reminder that the new digital age has resulted in the document volume being so large. And in fact, one of the things that was mentioned during the disclosure working group was that volume of data, and as a result of it not just being large, but then so much of it being irrelevant when it comes to disclosure. So we need to reduce that volume of data. That's where the use of technology comes into play. But also, like I mentioned, the judges weren't able to make any reasoned decision during the case manual conference because just the sheer volume of the data was making it very expensive and very timely to exchange and to provide any sort of analysis. And again, therefore, it's all very clear and well saying we want parties to discuss, but now this disclosure pilot is kind of almost making it duty bound to corrupt and forcing the cooperation, if for a better word, by basically installing penalizations if you don't. And finally, just from a national point of England and Wales, we want to be at the edge. The country, as a legal profession, as providers, as vendors, we want to be at the cutting edge of how we deal with review, and we want the rest of the world to follow us.
So I have another polling question here that I'd just like to see your opinions on. Should the e-discovery experts be involved earlier in the process? If you could just select which whether you think they should be, they shouldn't be, or whether you don't really have an opinion on that.
I'm sure that question will probably be very much dependent on whether you are a support specialist or whether you're in the legal department, whether you want them involved early or not. So it'll be interesting to see what the results are. And finally, just to emphasise the point on proportionality and reasonableness, obviously the disclosure needs to be directed to the issues and the proceedings, and the scope should not be any wider than is reasonable and proportionate. So yeah, obviously the emphasis has always been on reasonable and proportionate. That hasn't changed. It's just how we get into it now. So what is this disclosure review document and how is it different from the current EDQ? Well, the EDQ it was designed, was kind of like the infancy of electronic disclosure. So we're talking about, it talks about electronic documents and the reason for when you're disclosing them, but it doesn't actually talk about the use of TAR, or technology assisted review. If you want to use it, you have to put that information in a comment within the form where it says how you're going to review the documents that are responsive for your particular disclosure. You have to say, I need to use technology assisted review, I need to use an assisted review process. The DRD actually kind of makes it a little bit more blatant there. It kind of forces you, it is encouraging you the use of these particular technology. And in fact, Section 2 says that the party has considered the use of TAR to assist in the review. And where you have considered it but decided not to use it, especially when you're talking about the 50,000 documents, you need to give a good reason why. And I think this is kind of the massive emphasis shift between the new pilot and the current rules. Is the emphasis on using technology and having to give a reason why you're not using it as opposed to justify the use of it. And to go one step further, if you don't use tar, or the core can also give you directions to use it. Can also basically give you an advert order for costs. So it's kind of almost that you're actively encouraged to use it. You've got to give the reason not to, and if your reason's not good enough, then someone can come and step inside. No, you've got to use it anyway. So that's the main difference here.
Okay, so now we're going to move over to Sam, who's going to shift the focus slightly. So we've been looking at the rules themselves. We also want to share with you, the latest technology which is being used, the type of technology that the courts are really encouraging parties to use. So we're going to have a bit of a dive into some active learning and how that works around relativity, but it also applies to other platforms as well.
Thank you, Martin. Hi, everyone. So as Martin just explained, I'm just going to talk briefly first about the evolution of technology-assisted review. Now, technology has been assisting reviews for a very long time, from the storage of the first electronic documents to basic keyword searches that you could run across these documents. What we're really focusing on now is the use of this term TAR, so Technology-Assisted Review, which we have defined here as the formal process of training the system to produce defensible results. So it's actually 8 years since the terms TAR, or you may have heard instead of predictive coding, since they were first used, and 6 years since the first decision to approve the use of TAR. So these by no means new terms. Various studies have been carried out supporting the use of them. In 2005, we had a study by e-discovery expert A. Kershaw, who compared a human review team against an automated document assessment system, found that the humans identified just 51% of the relevant documents, whereas even in 2005, there was an automated system that could identify more than 95% of the documents. So this therefore challenges the assumption that human review is the gold standard. And that was supported by further studies. We have one here in 2009 by e-discovery researchers Grossman and Cormack, who concluded that TAR was not only just more effective than human review at finding relevant documents, it was also much cheaper. So what we're going to focus on here is before we look at active learning, we'll just talk about how it's evolved from TAR, what we call TAR 1.0, to TAR 2.0. So in our last webinar, we focused on sample-based review. So that would have been TAR 1.0, which uses what we refer to as latent semantic indexing. And we did talk about that briefly in the webinar. In 2018, we've seen a move towards instead the use of active learning, which is TAR 2.0, and now supported by many of the widely used platforms. We'll be focusing on its use within relativity today. And this instead uses algorithm known as SVM, so support vector machine. We will go into a little bit of detail on that, just so you can see the differences between active learning and sample-based review and why there's this huge shift towards it. So TAR 1.0, predictive coding and sample-based review, as we mentioned, it was a one-time training model. So reviewers were required to provide example documents, and they were also required to code training sets of documents. This could have been quite time-consuming, and the documents were then conceptually ranked with the distance between them. Now, basically what that could mean is that if an incorrect coding decision was then made, there is a potential that this would then have an impact on other documents within the set as well. And there was no opportunity to improve the ranking algorithm. So it wasn't what we refer to as a continuous learning method. There was one-time training only. And one potential disadvantage some people found with sample-based review is that then the system was making the coding decisions for the documents. So once the training sets had been run, with sample-based review predictive coding, the system was then able to make relevance coding on documents that potentially no human reviewer had ever actually set eyes on. The TAR 2.0, which we will refer to as active learning in relativity, is what we will look at. This uses continuous learning. So the model is continually learning and updating what it believes is a relevant document based upon this learning. And the learning is simply the review decisions or the coding decisions made by the reviewers. It uses an algorithm called SVM, and this basically means that you don't need to provide any training text or example documents. The analytics index and the algorithms will do all the learning. And instead of coding decisions being made for documents, instead the documents are prioritized for review based on these continually updated rankings. So reviewers will be seeing the most relevant documents and they will keep seeing what's then ranked as the most relevant documents until in theory there are no more relevant documents left in the workspace. Okay, so a bit more of an overview here of active learning. We mentioned that it's a continuous learning approach and it uses technology or algorithm called SVM. You will also see if you're using relativity, it is now part of their analytics suite, and that trend in more and more platforms using it is set to continue, especially as projects such as this pilot disclosure project is implemented. Just some statistics that pilot projects have found, and we do look at some case studies a bit later on, but pilot projects have found that around about 95% of relevant documents are served up in the queue. So reviewers are getting to see 95% of these relevant documents. And findings are that the active learning review is up to 20% faster. And the main reason for this is because the reviewers no longer need to examine the text of the documents. They no longer need to select these good example documents, and there's no training rounds to train the system on what is a relevant document. So how does it work? So it uses machine learning on a binary level. So by that we mean documents are put into basically two buckets. They're either categorized as relevant or not relevant. And as more documents are introduced, or as the more encoded documents, they are then put into these categories, depending, and that is based upon previous coding decisions that have been made by the reviewers. The text of the document is used, so by that we mean the documents are made text searchable, so OCR might be run across the documents to then pull that text out, and that is then used by the active learning project to determine whether a document is relevant or not. We've said now that the documents are ranked based upon how relevant they're likely to be. They are prioritized based upon their ranking, and then the highest ranking documents are served up to the reviewers in their review queue. And the key difference here, one of the main attractions we find with active learning, is that the software isn't making any coding decisions. Only the reviewers will be the ones coding the documents as relevant or potentially not relevant. So let's have a look at how this looks. So this is just an example here where we have two reviewers, and the reviewers have a queue of 5 documents, A down to E. Now the prioritized queue has served up the most highly ranked relevance documents first. So document A has a ranking of 90, and B 89, C 89, D 85, and D 83. So what I should mention about this is we can think of it as real-time continuous learning. So as these documents are reviewed, the decisions are fed back into the system, and that then influences how the other documents are ranked and their priority within the queue. So reviewer 1 and reviewer 2 have coded these 2 documents. Now the coding for that has had an impact, as we will see on the rest of the queue. The queue has now been reprioritized, and we will see document E has dropped out of the queue now altogether. Instead, we now have our most highly ranked relevant document as G, followed with a ranking of 87 by D, and so on. Okay, so what we're going to look at briefly is just a little bit more detail of how active learning works. So this just provides you with an overview of the key difference between that latent semantic indexing, which was used by sample-based review, and this support vector machine algorithm. And the idea of this is just to show you why there are example documents don't need to be coded and fed in as examples, and why there is less risk of any incorrectly coded documents having an impact on the coding of other documents. So we mentioned earlier that the documents are classified into one of two groups, relevant or not relevant. Now the documents are divided using something called a hyperplane. And a hyperplane is basically just a line or a margin that divides the two sets of documents. And what the Active Learning project is aiming to do is to determine where to position this hyperplane between the two sets of documents to know where any uncoded documents, what category they lie in, what side of the line they're on. And we'll look at some diagrams of that in a second. So once this hyperplane has been positioned, this is then used to predict the class, so relevant or non-relevant of any non-coded documents in the set. What's known as a recommendation algorithm then uses this classification to determine which documents should then be served up for review. So what's my most likely to be relevant documents? And this differs from that latent semantic indexing, which instead uses a nearest neighbor approach. So it looks how conceptually different a document was to the neighbors or the documents around it. And any coding decisions made to that document could then obviously impact the documents nearby. So the hyperplane, we see this example here, looks a bit like this. And I'm putting these lines on here because what we're looking for to find the correct hyperplane, we're looking for the largest possible margin between the documents coded, between relevant and non-relevant documents. So once we've found the largest margin, this should then ensure that any uncoded documents are correctly classified. So if we look at the diagram on the left, the solid colored documents are those that have been coded. So the blue ones are coded not relevant, and the orange ones are coded as relevant. Now we can see there that there's the largest gap between the two sets of documents, so that is the correct positioning at present for the hyperplane within these sets. And we can then use that to hopefully accurately determine that uncoded documents are sitting, in this case, on the relevant side there. On the diagram on the right, we have a much narrower margin, and that then means that, as you'll see, some of the documents that should be sitting in the relevant category have, in fact, on that incorrectly placed hyperplane, being categorized as not relevant. And this is what the system is continually updating the document ranks to try and work out that correct positioning in the hyperplane. Now, we mentioned earlier that incorrect coding of the documents should not have as much impact on the coding of other documents compared to potentially with a sample-based review project. And the reason for that is because the only documents that influence the positioning of the hyperplane are those that sit on the edge, so on the hyperplane's margin. And these are the documents that will have the biggest impact on the hyperplane. But anything coded outside of that, if they are incorrectly coded, that will not impact where the hyperplane sits. So it will have very minimal impact on the other documents. And the uncoded documents are scored based firstly upon the side of the hyperplane that they're sitting on, and then secondly on the distance away from the hyperplane, so away from the margin. And these scores then indicate how likely a given document is to be relevant, and this score is then what we refer to as the document's ranking. Okay, so we did say active learning, very quick and easy to set up. From a preparation point of view, there is simply 3 steps here. So this is within Relativity, but very similar within other platforms as well. First step is to identify the document set for review. Once that set of documents has been identified, we then recommend you code a sample of relevant and not relevant documents. Now, by sample, we mean this can be as few as 5 relevant and 5 not relevant documents. These coding decisions just help that the Active Learning project to have a starting point to sort of determine what it can prioritize in the queue from the very beginning, rather than serving up potentially almost random documents to see how you then code those first few. And the third criteria is simply to ensure that the review team is clear on the criteria for relevance. They don't need to be choosing and submitting any example documents, and they don't need to be completing any training rounds. Once these 3 steps have been completed, we're pretty much ready to get going on the project. From an administrator point of view, a classification index, so the analytics index, needs to be prepared based on the document set, and this helps to use the text, the extracted text from the documents, for active learning to do the learning and the ranking. A review group needs to be created, so we know who the reviewers are that have access to the project, and there needs to be a single choice relevance field that reviewers can simply code as relevant or not relevant. Then the next stage is to activate the queue, the active learning queue, and monitor the relevance rate, which we'll touch on in a bit. And then finally, when relevant documents are no longer being served up to the review team, we run what's called illusion tests and analyze the results. And the illusion test simply samples the remaining document set, and the reviewers then look at the sample to ensure that there aren't relevant documents or a high percentage of relevant documents left within the remaining set. For the reviewer, the first step is they access a view created for the active learning project, and then as you see on the right there, they simply press to start the review, and then a dynamic, so an updating queue of prioritized documents is then served up to them. They may also be involved in validating remaining non-relevant documents using illusion tests when we get to that stage of the project. So this is what the active learning dashboard looks like. So administrators, when they've created an active learning project, this is an example of the dashboard in Relativity that they will be looking at. So here we're doing a prioritized review. Now the prioritized review queue serves up the documents that are most likely to be relevant. And you can see here that we have the ranking, so the document rank distribution. We have the diagram here. At the start of the project, you may have a lot of documents around the ranking of 50. As the document progresses and the system starts to understand what's relevant and what's not relevant, you should see this number decrease, and the number of documents around the 50 mark will go down. Instead, you'll have more of your documents, more of your relevant documents grouped further up towards 100, and more of your non-relevant documents grouped further down towards the 0 end of the ranking. We also have here at the bottom the relevance rate, and this measures the prioritized reviews queue effectiveness in serving up those relevant documents. So it's looking at the difference between the documents that it believes were relevant compared to how the reviewers then actually code those documents. And this is a different type, so newly introduced queue within Relativity known as coverage review. This is a slightly different way of reviewing within an active learning project. So rather than just prioritizing and serving up the documents that are most likely to be relevant, with this type of queue, it instead serves up documents that will most impact the understanding of relevance. So typically the ones it's not so sure about. So if you remember back to the diagrams of the hyperplane where we saw the support vector sitting on the edge of the margin, they're the sorts of documents that are going to come up in the coverage review. The idea of this is then that you're able to very quickly divide the documents into relevant and non-relevant groups, whilst reviewing as few documents as possible. And just coming back to the relevance rate, so we talked briefly about how you could see there on the active learning dashboard, we have the relevance rate there, which is looking at the difference between what the system believes is relevant compared to the coding decisions made by reviewers. Now the relevance rate is updated every 200 documents, and it may stagnate if the reviewers don't code the documents consistently. Now, once this relevance rate plateaus, a fall may then indicate that all of the relevant documents have been found. So you can see on this one here, you can see the relevance rate plateaus, and then when it starts to fall, this may be a good time to then perform an illusion test, which we mentioned briefly earlier, which is where we sample the remaining documents just to check that we have a very high percentage of them being returned as not relevant.
Okay, now let's maybe Sahel can talk us through a couple of the case studies that we have here using the assisted review workflow.
Thank you, Sam, and thank you, Martin. So there've been the way that the active learning has progressed has meant there's been a number of case studies throughout. Some examples here, this particular example here shows a document population of around 130,000 documents, and it's a comparison between how a sort of traditional linear review results compare with when using active learning. So a traditional review here, we have the document population is quite large. After applying search terms and date ranges, we were able to reduce the document count down to just over 20,000 documents. Normally we're looking at from a population of documents within your review workspace, you tend to find about 10% is what you're actually looking at reviewing. And then from that, you're also having probably again, similar 10% of that is actually documents that are marked relevant. So here, of the 20,000 documents, 2,500 documents were tagged as relevant. So we're looking at about 11% of what was reviewed was actually disclosed or was relevant. Yet the review obviously took 20,000 documents. Now, when we've done the active learning case, by using the prioritization queue, we reviewed just over 4,000 documents, and then we saw the rate drop, the relevance rate drop, as Sam mentioned. As it started dropping, we realized it was time to conduct an illusion test. The illusion test was run over about 1,400 documents. So in total, we reviewed 5,500 documents, which was just over 75% reduction on the actual linear review. So already just a significant saving there. And there have been other cases. There's a case where the document count volume was about 300,000, over 330,000 documents. And this particular example shows the way that the illusion test can be run and what it does. So this particular case had the illusion test run after a very early stage in the project. Where only a couple of thousand documents had been reviewed, but they were all relevant, and they ran a test to see if they had found all relevant documents. What they found that they hadn't. There was still a very large portion of documents within the unreviewed set that were relevant or potentially relevant. So the review continued. And then 10 days later, the rate again had dropped. Another illusion test was run. And this time the recall was a lot higher, and the margin was like 92 to 97%. The margin for error there was 95%, give or take 2.5%, which is statistical level. So the review was halted at that stage, which meant that 300,000 documents of the 330,000 documents did not need to be reviewed. It's also possible to have a review based on a smaller subset of data. This one, we're looking at 22,000 documents, and a lot of the documents in this particular example were actually relevant. So it was expected that only over half the documents were relevant. But again, the active learning prioritization queue allowed the documents that were relevant to be queued at the top of the list. So therefore, even though there was a lot of relevant documents and you still had to review a lot of documents, it still enabled the documents that were relevant to be tagged early, so you still end up reviewing about 50% of the documents rather than all 22,000 and capture the relevant documents. In the disclosure pilot, there mentions, that if you're not using technology, you should give us a reason. And here are a couple of reasons why you might not use it. If your document population isn't, if you're not expected to find many relevant documents, the active learning process, would work. It would just not be as efficient as it would be if there were more relevant documents. So if you're looking at a very small document count of relevance compared to the actual total population, you may want to find other ways to reduce that volume of documents before trying to do active learning. There are certain documents that just will not be able to the system won't be able to learn, and that's obviously documents without text, picture files, images. Certain spreadsheets obviously wouldn't work. I think complex construction cases contain diagrams and Gantt charts that may not necessarily contain much text. If you have a multi-language case, you can use active learning as it's an algorithm. It's language agnostic, but you may find that the active learning process might work better if you separate the documents out into the languages. So if you had two main languages in particular, you may want to run an active learning case on each language rather than on the whole workspace. Obviously, it's very important to make sure that documents are reviewed by using the four corners methodology, i.e. the document is taken into account and not as a result of any family members or any attachments. And again, as Sam mentioned during her to talk about the workflow and the process, it's a binary thing, it's relevant or not relevant. You are able to tag for issues and privilege and confidentiality, but they have no impact on the actual active learning process. So to conclude or summarize, the disclosure pilot states very clearly that you must use technology to review, especially when you're looking at 50,000 documents. So the expectation is now shifted to, should you use it you are going to use it, and you have to very much give a good reason why you are not going to use it. And that comes down to the parties. It also therefore means that it's more beneficial for the parties to involve experts at an early stage so that they can get on top of this situation earlier, and then give a justification why they're not using it, or to basically help them use it in the most efficient way. Given the speed in which technology assisted review has changed in the last few years, it's very much here to stay. It's a lot more easier and quicker to set up now than it was in its infancy. Again, exploitation of the technology advancements. There's no training required, or very little training required in terms of usage. As Sam demonstrated in one of the slides, a reviewer simply gets a queue of documents. There's no batching, there's no checking documents in and out, there's no QA process in terms of basically setting up a sort of QA process to learn this train system up. It's very much a reviewer goes in and starts reviewing, and hopefully he or she will see the documents that are most relevant first. Also, and one of the biggest changes from the original sample-based review is the documents that are marked as relevant will still be reviewed by a person, human, not by the system, and you're not going to be looking at sensitive documents that haven't been viewed. So if you are disclosing documents, the relevant documents will always be tagged by a human reviewer. We're seeing in the state studies that these results are becoming more and more reliable, in various cases from small document sets to large. So what does this mean? Well, the courts are embracing it. The disclosure pilot is encouraging it and actively asking people to use it. It's becoming the norm to the point where literally it will just be called review, I imagine, because it becomes so common use, and it will involve smaller teams. And if you have smaller review teams, you can have experts. You can have people who are more involved in the matter, and therefore their review will be that much more richer.
Thank you very much, Sohail and Sam. I think it's definitely given us some good insight into what the rules are offering and how the technology can assist. Just to let everybody know, we haven't received any questions yet, so if you do want to submit a question, please do so now. I'm going to just launch another poll, a final poll here, just to ask the question: do you believe that the new rules being piloted will reduce the cost of disclosure? And then once we've got the results from this, we'll go through all of our polling results. So we've got various ones coming in now. Okay, so I'm going to close off that poll now. Oh, hang on, sorry, another couple are coming in. Give it another couple of seconds. Okay. So now I'll just go through and share the earlier polls. So the first one I'll share is should e-discovery experts be involved earlier in the process? Well, that's not showing. I'm not sure this is showing on the screen at the moment. And let me change that. Hopefully that will work. Okay, so we can see now that it's a resounding yes to that. So we should be, engaging with the e-discovery experts early on. The next poll is the 50,000 document threshold for the use of technology. Is that right? It's interesting. It's a very mixed response there. Not many people think it's too high. it looks like they've said it about right, or it's maybe too low. So I'm a little bit surprised by that answer. I would have actually probably swayed towards it's a little bit high, but I guess it does depend on the situation. And finally, do the new rules being piloted, do you think they will reduce the cost of disclosure? And it seems like at this point at least, the answer is yes. So I mean that's obviously positive. That's the whole reason for the big change. I know there's been a lot of effort getting to this point, and I think it looks like it is heading in the right direction. And I think as Sahel mentioned earlier on, these roles, this is a pilot, and they will evolve, and so they will be improved upon over time as well, over the next 2 years.
And in fact, sorry to interrupt, also just to sort of say, as the disclosure is a pilot and it's going to be one for a couple of years, the feedback that they receive from both the legal aspect as well as the discovery side of things is going to be very invaluable to them to basically adapt and change as they see fit. So as the technology evolves, as the matters, depending on the matters, then these rules can be adapted. So your input is invaluable.
Okay, well, thank you very much, everybody, for your time today. We will be circulating these slides to the participants so you can see them. We haven't got any questions, so we'll leave it there today. Thank you very much.